Hello and welcome to the Resume Workshop, Part 1. For this particular video, we are going to focus solely on the resume. So let's first take a look at what will be covered in this particular video. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is the purpose. Why do we want to write a resume? The second thing that I would like to talk about in this video is the two different types of resumes. I'd like to focus on the two different types and why you might want to choose to use one type versus the other type. The third item that I'd like to focus on is the overall formatting of the resume, as well as the different sections you might include in your particular resume. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about some tips and tricks to make your resume stand out amongst all the rest. I like to think that a resume is very similar to like a ladder, something that you use, a tool that you use that will help you get to where you want to be, whether that be in the next month or two, or maybe in the next 6 months, or if you're thinking about using your resume to enter into a new career and maybe you have an end goal in mind of what you would like to be in another 5 to 10 years. That resume is a stepping stool or a ladder to get to where you want to be. So let's talk specifically about the purpose. Why do we want to write a resume? First, the purpose of a resume is to essentially give the employer a snapshot of your skills and your qualifications. It's that first opportunity to make that impression. When an employer puts out there that they're looking for somebody for a job, the easiest way for them to do that is to ask people to send in why they are the right person for the job. So that resume essentially provides the employer with what you can do and how you would best fit that particular position, what you would bring to the table, what skills you have, qualifications you have, as well as your ability to communicate your best attributes and your skills. Communication is one of the top skills that all employers are looking for. Communication is not only important verbally, but also being able to communicate through writing. You will do at least a little bit in every single job out there, whether you're a mechanic, to whether you're a paralegal, whether you are administrative assistant, to a doctor, to a dentist, to a teacher, to a librarian. In every single profession, communication is always a part of the job. And being able to showcase your communication skills in your resume will help you get ahead of the rest of the applicants, being able to show that you can communicate effectively. So the resume can do a couple things. Again, it can provide that snapshot for the employer of why you qualify, why you have the skills to get that position. It can give that opportunity to make a really good first impression, as well as showcase your communication skills. So those are the main purposes of why we want to write a resume and why a good resume is so very important. I have a couple things for you to think about before we move on to talking about the different types of the resume. The first number that I have here is 5 to 10 seconds. All right, 5 to 10 seconds. Why is it so important to spend time and put together a really nice resume? 5 to 10 seconds. That is the average amount of time an employer looks at a resume. Now, you might be thinking, my goodness, why should I put in so much time and energy into writing something that an employer may only look at for 5 to 10 seconds? Well, again, it really does make a difference in getting that job. If you can make it through the first 5 to 10 seconds of an employer looking at it, then you are already on your way to the next step in the hiring process. So you really need to make sure that you spend that time making sure your resume stands out from the rest. All right, 5 to 10 seconds, average time an employer looks at a resume. 118 to 250. That number. What does that mean? That means that's the average number of applicants applying for a single job. Now, sometimes, that'll shift a little depending on the position and the job market and the area that the job is located in. But on average, about 118 to 250 other people are applying for that same job. Now, going back to that first number, 5 to 10 seconds, now that kind of makes sense now. If an employer is looking at 118 to 250 resumes, they only may have 5 to 10 seconds to look through each one. 6 to 10, what does this last number mean? This last number indicates the average number of people who get called for an interview. So looking back at these numbers, we have out of 118 to 250 people, an employer may call 6 to 10 of those for an actual interview to the next step of the hiring process. And in order to get through all of those all those applicants, the 118 to 250 people, they again may only spend about 5 to 10 seconds on a resume. So if you want to be one of those 6 to 10 people that gets called back to interview for that position, you need to make sure that you spend that extra time on putting together a really nice resume that creates that snapshot for the employer to impress them in those 5 to 10 seconds. Okay, now we'll talk about the next step. My hope is that by the end of this video, you will feel comfortable creating a resume that will get you through those first 5 to 10 seconds of evaluation of your resume by an employer and hopefully be able to be one of those 6 to 10 people called back for an interview. For our purposes, for our video, we're going to focus on only 2 different types of resumes. I will say that there are other types out there. However, I find that these 2 particular types of resume styles are going to be the most common and the most useful type of resume for any job that you're looking to apply for. They will work for anything. So let's talk about those 2 types. The first is going to be the chronological type, and the second that we are going to focus on, the second type, is going to be called the functional. Now, when I talk about each one of these, I am going to explain when you might want to use the chronological resume and when you might want to use the functional. I will also provide you with some examples of what each of these will look like. The first type of resume that we're going to talk about in this video is the chronological resume. This is probably one of the most common type of resume styles, one of the most popular versions. This is where you list your jobs that you've had in essentially reverse chronological order. So you list starting with the most recent job that you've had, and then you go back from there. Now, why would you want to use this type of resume structure? The first reason is that it would focus your experience on your job experience. So let's say that you are applying for a job as an administrative assistant, and you have worked as an administrative assistant before. Then you want to showcase your work experience in that particular field. So if you have work experience in the job that you are applying for, this is a really nice style of resume. So this is where you would share your job experience. Another reason why it's really great for that particular reason is that you can actually showcase maybe where you worked. So if you worked for a notable company, you could actually highlight that in your resume. It would be in a very focused and important position in the resume. In addition, it would also include your position title. So again, if you are seeking employment as an administrative assistant and you've had that title before, having this style would allow you to showcase that your job experience in that particular field. It can also highlight the length of employment that you've been there. So let's say that you were in your last job for 5 years. That would be something that you would want to show your future employer, that you have experience staying in a position for a while. So these are a couple of reasons why you might have the chronological. Something else to think about with the chronological format, because the chronological format focuses on your job experience in the past, you'd want to think about, have you been in the last couple jobs that you've had, do they directly relate to the job that you are applying for? So let's say that you are, again, applying for that administrative assistant. In the last 2 or 3 jobs that you've had, have you had a similar title like that before? That's when you would want to use the chronological style. Now, if you don't have that as your job title for past jobs, let's say that you actually, instead of doing administrative work, maybe you worked as a sales associate, then we may want to look at a different style of resume, the other one that we're going to talk about, which is functional. So chronological, you really want to think about, do you already have experience in that particular field that you're applying for? If that's the case and you've had a couple jobs in that field, you'd want to use this style. Something else to think about is if you had any sort of gaps in your employment, let's say that you took a leave of absence or you had 6 months to a year in between places of employment, then this may not necessarily be the style for you. This is primarily for people who have had pretty steady employment, and especially in the field that they're looking to apply. Now, let's go ahead and look at an example of what a chronological resume looks like. Here we have an example of a chronological resume. At the top of all resumes, we do want to have our information, our communication information, clearly marked at the top. Generally, all resumes will have an overview section or a list of some sort of summary qualifications, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. What I want to take a look at is this next section. The very, very first section, aside from the summary of qualifications or the overview, is the professional experience section. This is what makes it a chronological resume. We start with our work experience and we start with the most recent employer, and then we work backwards. So here we have the place of employment, where it was located, and then we have our title, our position title here, and then we have the year or the time that we were employed at that location. Okay, so here is the present. Then as we go back, we were only there, we started there in 2014. You'll notice this next section, this next list of place of employment goes up to 2014. And it's okay to just put the year. That's okay. Instead of a specific date, that's okay to do, is just have the year. And notice that there's no gap. So gaps usually can create a red flag for the employer, and we want to eliminate any red flags from our resume. As if you remember, sometimes employers are looking at up to 200 resumes for each position. We don't want any red flags. So chronological, we want to make sure that we don't have any gaps. So for our chronological, we'll go through our work experience. All right. And then at the very bottom of our resume is where we put our education. Here, for chronological, the most important thing that we want to stress to the employer that we are applying to is our professional experience, that we have the experience necessary to complete the position or to do the position that we're applying for, and we are extremely qualified for that position. All right, so chronological, again, has to do with your professional experience and making sure that you start with your latest place of employment and work backwards. Now, notice that there's only about 3 jobs that are listed here. If you have had a number of employment places, let's say that you are maybe you're a little older and you're looking for a new job, and you've been in the work field for 20 years, you might have had anywhere from 4 to 5 to 6 different jobs. It is not necessary that you go back to your very first job. Okay, I would say that if you have more than 3 positions prior to the one that you are looking at in that same field, I would just go back to the previous 3 places of employment. All right. And just then go on to your level of education or some of the other categories or sections that we'll talk about later in our video. So this is the chronological resume. All right. We always have our information at the top. We have some sort of overview or objective statement, or we could even have a list of summary of qualifications. And I will talk about these a little bit later in our video. And then we have our professional experience, starting with the most recent, moving to the least recent. Okay. And that is the chronological resume. The second type of resume style that we're going to talk about for this video is called the functional style. The functional style is a really great style if, one, you don't have much work experience. Maybe you're a student just coming out of high school or college, and you don't actually have any real world or job experience. The functional style is a really good style for you. The second reason a functional style can work for you, or the second reason, would be if you have gaps in your employment. For example, if for whatever reason you had to take some time away from the workforce, maybe you stayed home to raise your children. Maybe something else happened that you had to take a break and you had to be home. This is a really great style for you because, again, the way that it's organized, it won't raise any of those red flags for an employer. It's not going to focus on that gap. It's going to focus on your experiences or your skill set. So first, if you don't have any job experience. Second, if you have any gaps in employment. The other reason that it can really help or be beneficial for a style for you is if you are looking to change careers. For example, if you are a teacher and you're looking to switch gears and go into business, this type of style can help showcase the skills that you had in one job and how it translates to a completely different career path. If you are in marketing and you want to go into something completely different, again, this style can help you focus on the skill set and what's similar from what you used to do in your old career and what you want to do in your future career. And those are really the 3 biggest reasons that you'd want to use the functional style. the key here is it really focuses in on the skills that you have, not necessarily the jobs that you've had in the past, but the skill set that you have. So here we have an example of a functional resume. You'll notice that we have our contact information for ourselves at the top. Of course, we want that to be front and center for the employer, who we are and how they can get a hold of us. The next item you'll notice is similar to the previous format, the chronological. We usually have some sort of career objective or summary of qualifications, things like that, we'll have right at the top as well. Then we get into the functional aspects of the resume. Here, the core qualifications. Here we get to highlight specifically why we qualify for that particular job. Notice we're not listing our previous employment right away. We don't want to highlight that yet. We want to really highlight the experience that we have that directly corresponds with the job that we are applying for. Whether or not the job that we had previously is the same job. So if you're looking at an administrative assistant position and you weren't one previously, maybe you're a sales associate before, we want to think about what did we do? What skills did we have as a sales associate that directly transfers to being an office administrator? All right. And that's what we really focus on and highlight. Then we can think about those experience and the skills and really focus on just those skills. Maybe we had administrative skills. Maybe we did administrative work as a sales associate. So let's talk about what that looked like and how that would translate then into an office administration. I will be providing a little bit later some of the skills that employers are looking for, and also skill grouping sets that you can really focus on with the functional resume. Problem solving is a really great skill that is necessary for all different types of jobs, careers, positions. You can highlight problem solving and think about what did you do in your previous position that shows that you know how to problem solve. And then if the position that you're applying for requires some management experience, maybe your title wasn't a manager. However, you did have experience managing something or managing people. So here you can actually highlight that those experiences that you had. Then the last thing that we have on here is employment history, if we have it. This is not the main focus of our resume. We want the employer focusing on the skills that we have and the experience that we have, not necessarily just simply the jobs that we've had. All right. But there still is a place that you can put employment history and education on a resume. All right. But the functional, again, focuses on experiences and skills, not necessarily the job that we had before and not necessarily the position that we had before. Okay. And that's the biggest difference between the chronological and the functional resume. So once you decide what type of resume that you're going to use, whether it be the chronological or the functional, the next thing that you want to start thinking about is what you're going to include in your actual resume. What are the different sections you're going to include, because there are a few different things you can choose. And then also the overall formatting of the resume. Generally, you are going to use some sort of word processing program, whether it be Microsoft Word or Google Docs, which is an open source program that if you have access to the internet, you will have access to Google Docs. So once you have a word processing document open, then you're going to start thinking about that overall format. So here are some things that you want to think about the actual overall look of your resume. First, you want it to look very clean. If you remember back, the employer may only spend about 5 to 10 seconds with their first look at a resume. And if a resume looks dirty, if it looks crumpled, if it looks smudged. If it doesn't look clean right away, they're going to move on to another applicant, because that might tell them that you are not, that's how you take your work. Maybe you're not as clean and precise as a worker as they're looking for. So you want it to look as clean as possible. Something else that you want to consider is using bullet points when you are talking about specific parts of your resume. So let's say that you're doing chronological and you are highlighting your skills and your duties, things that you were responsible for in a particular job that you had. You want to use bullet points. Again, the person who is looking through these doesn't have a whole lot of time and they've got a lot to look through. So having it bullet pointed in non-complete sentences, so you're looking at phrases, is going to help them kind of go through and see if they can find what they're looking for in a quicker manner. So you want things bulleted. You want something called parallelism. Parallelism has to deal with each bullet point essentially starts in the same format. Usually when you're talking about your responsibilities or your skill sets, you're thinking about action verbs. Verbs are things, is something that you did. And I'm going to provide you in just a moment a list of really great action verbs that you could use for your resume. But parallelism would mean that each of those bullet points would start with the verb, and that verb is in the same tense. And what I mean by tense is if you had the job in the past, then you would use past tense. So you could say managed the store, managed a register. You would have it where the verb ended the same way every time, either with ed or if it's a variation of that verb. So you want to have it have it with parallelism. Generally, you want to keep your resume to about 1 page. It's okay if you go a little longer. I don't think I would have a resume any more than 2 pages max, but try and keep it to about 1 page. And then the next thing that I have down under a page is balanced. And then I have in parentheses white space. And what I mean by that is if you look at this resume to the right here, you'll notice that there are words like that take up and use pretty much the entire page. It doesn't stop halfway down the page or even just 3/4 down the page, because if it did, it would have a lot of free white space on here. And that in itself can be a red flag for a future employer. They may see that white space and say, maybe this person doesn't have as many qualifications and skills that we are looking for. So you want to make sure that your page is nice and balanced. It doesn't have a lot of free white space. You'll also notice that this particular individual organized their essay so that the different sections are labeled clearly in the left margin and everything's bulleted in the space. So an employer can quickly, with their eyes, skim down and find the different sections pretty quickly. They even put it in bold, and then they can look at those individual sections in whichever order they want to look at. So they really balanced it and made it clear and easy to read. Size 12 font. Anything larger than that makes it almost look like you're trying to just simply fill white space. So try and keep it about a size 12 font. I wouldn't go under a size 12 just because it can get difficult for people to read. And, if the interviewer or the human resource person that's looking at this has glasses or has a harder time reading things, you don't want to make it more difficult where they have to try and squint. So I would say try for a size 12 font. Obviously, this person put their name bigger at the top. That's okay to do. Sometimes you can play with your section titles where you have your job experience or your education. You can put that all in caps, but it's still always the same font all the way through. And then the last thing that it says is simple, not fancy. I'm quite familiar that Word, the Word program, Microsoft Word, does provide templates for various different types of writing. And I know that they have lots of different resume templates out there, and some of them get quite fancy. I will tell you that fancy doesn't necessarily make it nicer. What makes a resume nice is making sure that it's clean, crisp, that it's well organized, and it is it's consistent. All right. And what I mean by consistent is you use the same font all the way through. You use the same size font. You could potentially, like I said, play with bold when you are highlighting your different sections of your resume. Sometimes I see dates when they talk about chronological order and they're talking about the dates of employment. They might put something like that in italics, but even that will always be in the same exact font and same size. So that's really what you want to try and strive for. Now, when we talk about organizational skills or organization in different sections of your resume, something that you might want to think about are some of the top 10 employability skills. And this ties really well to the functional resume. So if you're using that style because of a gap in employment, or maybe you are looking to leave your current career and go off into another, or maybe this is your very first job. These are the skills that most employers are looking for. And if you can use these to organize your resume, I think that would be really important and set you apart from the other resumes. And if you'll notice, the top one says communication. It doesn't matter what job you're in, communication is always, always, always going to be a number one component to every single job. Can you communicate verbally? Can you communicate through writing? Okay. So any sort of experience that you have that you can show that. Teamwork, reliability, problem solving, organizing and planning, initiative, self-management, leadership, learning, technology. These are all really great employability skills that every place is looking for. So you really want to think about those. When you are creating your resume, I would not use all of them. I would try and prioritize at least 3 and highlight them or make them prominent in your resume. Because again, these are some of the most common skills that most employers really are seeking in future employees. Now, I mentioned before about action verbs when you are organizing your resume. There are many different websites out there that if you just did a simple engine search for action verbs to use in resumes, there's lots of really great references and resources out there. This PDF actually comes from the University of Berkeley website, and they have essentially created a table of some really great verbs that you could use when you're talking about particular skills. So this would work really well in both types of resumes. So for example, if you're doing the chronological resume, and let's say that you are, again, applying for an administrative assistant position, and your past position, your past job, your most recent one was as an administrative assistant, you could look at these different skills and these different verbs, and you could use these verbs to help explain in bulleted point what you specifically did in your position. So maybe one of the things that you needed to do in your previous position was you needed to collect certain types of important information. So you could state that. You could say collected such and such. Maybe you needed to actually do some calculations. You can say calculated budgets for the director of the office. You can look through here and you can use these types of verbs to help organize what exactly you did. And these are really great verbs to use to help explain. So if you struggle with trying to explain what you did and you struggle with that kind of vocabulary too, and what's going to be the most impressive, having a document like this with a list of verbs that you can just go through and choose is going to be really, really helpful. And the other thing that I really like about this particular PDF is that they're already all in past tense. They're already set up for you, so you're already going to have the parallelism as long as you just start your bullet point with the verb. Don't say I analyzed, just say analyzed. We already know the resume is about you, so you don't have to say the I part. If you're doing the functional resume, here again, it's actually got it organized already in your skill set. So if you really wanted to focus on your communication skills, you can have one of your sections in your resume be labeled communication skills, and you can use these different verbs to illuminate your different experiences. Let's say you want to talk about your technical skills. You can use these different verbs to help describe what you have experience within the technical field. All right. And finally, just some tips and tricks to consider and think about. First, when you're using the bold and italics in your resume, make sure that you only use it very purposely and specifically. So for example, I mentioned in your resumes where you have your different sections listed, if you have your professional experiences listed, if you have your education listed, those titles of the section, you could potentially put those in bold, and you could even capitalize all the letters in those, and that would be okay. If you did that, I wouldn't put anything else in bold. For italics, I would use italics very, very limited. All right. Maybe you might want to just put the dates, any dates that you have in italics. Be very consistent though, and use it limitedly. You don't want to go kind of crazy with the special effects and things that are overtly fancy. And that even goes for your font. Keep your font simple. And keep it to the sans serif or the Times New Roman or the Arial fonts, basic default fonts. Consider special paper. Now, there is something called resume paper out there where you can run it through a printer and print off your resume on that paper. Why it's called resume paper and why you might want to consider this is that it's actually a different weight. So when the employer gets to your resume, it's going to feel different in their hand. Again, it doesn't need to be very fancy paper. It can be white. It could have maybe a little bit of a linen finish, but resume paper is slightly thicker and it has a slightly heavier weight. So it's going to feel different in their hands, and it's going to look a little bit crisper. It's going to look a little bit more professional than just your average printer paper. So that can be something that could set you apart, and they might pause because of that. Please brag about yourself. Be proud of what you've done. Be proud of the experiences that you have. Don't lie. Never lie on a resume. You never know if it's going to come back and haunt you, if they're going to be able to find the lies out, and you don't want to be put in that position. Brag, don't lie. And then lastly, be very specific. Be very specific with your duties. Be very specific of your experiences. And again, going back to that bragging, choose specific examples that you can pull from your past that sets you apart from the other applicants. And then what I'd like to leave you with is just the overall process. The first thing you go about doing is researching the company and the job. Find out a little bit about the company, because that can help actually organize your resume and think about what you should actually be putting. Because again, your resume should be geared towards the job that you're applying. It shouldn't be generic. Brainstorming those matching skills. Think about what are the things that you have, what skills do you have that match up with that position, match up with that company. Draft, revise, and edit. There is no such thing as editing a resume too much. Have other people look through it. One spelling error, one grammatical mistake, that can be the difference between getting an interview and not getting an interview. You want to put your absolute best foot forward. So revise, draft, edit, make sure that you have other people look at it. And then finally, you either print it and you send it with the cover letter, which we'll talk about in another workshop, or even now today, you can even send resumes through email. Okay, good luck in your job application process. And thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, I did include my email in the thanks slide and then also the phone number to the library. I am more than happy to help answer any questions that you might have. And I'm hoping to include some resources that go along with this video that might help writing the resume a little bit easier for you. So again, good luck, and I hope you get the job that you desire.